Listen closely. Some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. They serve as a chilling reminder of the fine line between adventure and tragedy. This is one of those stories. It begins on February 10th, 2018. On a bitterly cold morning in upstate New York, the air was so frigid your breath turned to mist before it even left your lips. Three friends, united by a passion for exploration, were about to embark on an adventure that would change their lives forever. Jake Morgan, a 24-year-old chemist from Boston, was the bold one. Emily Hayes, a nurse, had a stubborn streak but a soft heart. And Mark Thompson, a geology grad student from Harvard, was the cautious planner. Their goal was an old cave system locals called Shredder's Deep. Decades earlier, two hunters tracking a deer stumbled upon a narrow crack in the limestone, revealing a hidden world beneath the earth. Over the years, the cave's reputation grew among explorers. It was known as a maze of tight corridors, winding bends, and a final, terrifying challenge, an 80-foot vertical drop into a hidden chamber known as the Bell. Very few had ever gone that far. Even fewer had returned with good memories. Before heading to the cave, Jake made a quick stop at a weathered farmhouse. It belonged to George Lyons, a retired miner in his late 70s who had mapped part of the cave system back in the 70s. George had a simple, stark warning for them. Watch the water. The thaw had come early that week, and mountain runoff was rushing through the limestone channels like veins of ice. But young explorers are often built on a mix of unshakable curiosity and blind faith. They nodded, smiled politely, thanked the old man for his advice, and drove off toward the entrance, their spirits high. Inside the cave, the world changed. Sound was immediately swallowed by the stone. The air was thick with the smell of wet rock and iron. Their headlamps cast trembling circles of light along slick, dark walls, catching the rhythmic drip of water falling from the ceiling. Each drop sounded like a ticking clock in the immense silence. They gave names to the sections as they navigated deeper into the earth. First came the lemon squeeze, a passage so tight they had to turn their bodies sideways and exhale just to pass through. Then, the Z-bend, where Emily scraped her knee raw on a jagged edge of rock. After that was the gun barrel, a long, straight tunnel that forced them to crawl on their hands and knees through a channel of freezing runoff that soaked their clothes to the bone. Hours passed in that steady, grueling rhythm of breath and effort. The cold was seeping into their bodies, but the thrill of discovery pushed them onward. Finally, they reached their goal, the opening to the bell shaft. It was a perfect, dark circle in the floor, a vertical drop into absolute blackness. It plunged about 80 feet deep, with water streaming down the walls like shimmering silver threads in their headlamp beams. Jake, ever the leader, volunteered to go first. He meticulously checked his harness, clipped into the rope, and began to lower himself into the abyss. Above, Emily and Mark watched his light drift downward, a tiny, brave glow shrinking in the vast dark. He was their lifeline, their point of contact with the world below. Halfway down, the rope in their hands jerked suddenly, violently. "You good," Mark called out, his voice echoing unnervingly in the chamber. For a moment, there was no answer, only the steady hiss of falling water. Then Jake's voice echoed back, strained and panicked. "Something's wrong with the line, I can't." His words were cut off. The stream of water trickling into the shaft had suddenly intensified. What had been a manageable flow was now a torrent. The runoff from the morning's thaw was funneling directly into the shaft, landing on Jake with crushing force. It was like standing under a waterfall of ice, nearly 10 gallons a minute of freezing water slamming into his shoulders, his neck, his face. He tried to climb back up, his hands fumbling for purchase on the rope. But his gloves were slick, his grip failing. The cold was paralyzing him. His breathing grew ragged, desperate gasps for air between waves of water. Emily leaned over the edge, shouting his name until her voice cracked with fear. For nearly an hour, she and Mark fought with the rope, pulling with all their might, trying to haul him back to safety. The line went taut, then slack, then taut again. But it was clear he was no longer pulling from his end. His voice was gone. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. Mark made the hardest decision of his life. Leaving Emily to wait in the chamber, he began the long, agonizing crawl back toward the entrance to find help. Every inch of the journey was a race against time. By nightfall, a massive rescue operation was underway. Crews arrived from across the state, firefighters, specialized cave rescue units, even a team flown in from Washington, D.C., on an Air Force transport. 6 of them, young and incredibly brave, were led by a man named Doug Bradford. None had ever performed a cave rescue quite like this, but they had trained for the impossible. They worked relentlessly through the dark for hours, widening passages with specialized tools, threading new ropes, and pumping oxygen into the deep sections of the cave. They finally reached the bell shaft by dawn. The water was still pouring down. When a rescuer reached out and touched Jake's rope, they knew. His body hung limp, motionless, still suspended mid-descent. The water that had taken his strength had also stolen his warmth. The coroner would later confirm it was severe hypothermia. His core body temperature had dropped below the point of survival long before his heart finally stopped. For 3 more grueling days, the rescuers tried to bring him home. The mission shifted from rescue to recovery, but the cave seemed to be fighting back. The rock was brittle, the tunnels dangerously narrow. Every attempt to widen the shaft for recovery triggered new, small collapses. On the 3rd night, a deep rumble echoed through the cave system. The walls shifted and groaned. A huge section of the ceiling gave way. Mud and stone rained down, sealing the lower chamber completely. Doug Bradford shouted for his team to retreat. It was no longer a recovery, it was a fight for their own lives. They made it out, shaken, covered in mud, but alive. They had to leave Jake behind. Days later, the county made the difficult decision to seal the cave permanently. Explosives were set at the entrance. The earth trembled once, then fell silent forever. Shredder's Deep was closed, a tomb sealed by tons of rock. A memorial stone was placed on the hillside above a simple granite marker etched with Jake's name and the words, "He followed the light into the depths." Emily returns to that hillside every February, even now. She sits in the quiet, listening to the wind move through the trees. She says that sometimes, if she listens closely, she can still hear the sound of dripping water from deep beneath the ground, steady, rhythmic, eternal. It's as if the cave is still breathing, holding on to the memory of the young explorer who dared to venture into its heart and never returned. Thank you for listening to this story. It's a powerful reminder of the respect nature demands. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Stay safe out there. It was February 8th, 2018. The air in northern Minnesota was so cold that the trees around Lake Superior cracked in the silence. But beneath the thick ice, a team of 5 highly experienced cave divers were gearing up for what they called the Big One. They were about to attempt a record-setting dive through the Iron Mountain system, one of the deepest and most complex underwater cave networks in North America. Their mission was ambitious, bordering on audacious. The plan was to descend nearly 400 feet, navigate a submerged tunnel that cuts directly under the mountain, and resurface in a distant air pocket known as Chamber 7. This wasn't just a dive. It was a test of absolute perfection, a ballet of endurance, coordination, and unshakable calm. The team moved like a single, well-oiled machine. Each diver was equipped with a closed-circuit rebreather, a sophisticated piece of tech that recycles oxygen, allowing for hours of submersion without releasing telltale bubbles. Every single movement had been planned, every hand signal rehearsed. They had spent months training for this exact moment. But they all knew the cave didn't care about their plans. It was merciless. The water was just above freezing. Visibility was a few feet at best. The limestone corridors were tight and twisted, lined with sharp edges that could slice a dry suit wide open with the slightest miscalculation. As they began their descent, the powerful beams from their helmets painted the stone walls in eerie, fleeting streaks of blue and silver. The only sound was their own breathing, and their only guide back to the surface was a simple orange cord no thicker than a pencil. This was their guideline, their lifeline. If you lost it, you were lost for good. For the first 2 hours, everything went exactly as planned. They moved in a staggered formation, each diver perfectly managing their buoyancy, their eyes fixed on the faint beam of the diver ahead. They were making good time, but then, as they reached the deepest section of the dive, just over 360 feet down, something shifted. The rock walls seemed to press in on them, getting tighter and tighter. The slightest touch sent clouds of silt swirling, instantly turning the crystal clear water into an impenetrable fog. And then, out of the darkness, it happened. One diver, a 33-year-old from Duluth named Jack Laramie, just stopped. His tank had scraped against a narrow section of the passage, a pinch point. He tried to twist his body free, but the rock had him pinned. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, let alone one trying to maneuver out of a jam. A wave of panic began to pulse through his system. He could feel it in his breath. His rebreather, his lifeline, started to fail. First, a flicker on the digital display, then a high-pitched, piercing alarm. The gas mixture was wrong. Too much carbon dioxide was building up. His breaths became frantic, loud, and desperate. "Stay calm," his teammate Mark shouted through his mask, his voice muffled and distorted by the regulator. But Jack couldn't move. He was wedged tight, his gear snagged on a sharp lip of rock. Mark moved in to help, but there was no room for two divers to work. He pushed, he pulled, he tugged desperately at Jack's harness. But the cave just responded by releasing another thick cloud of black silt, completely swallowing their lights. In a matter of seconds, they were blind. They couldn't see each other at all. Jack's breathing grew ragged and then sputtered. His regulator slipped from his mouth. In the pitch black, Mark frantically reached for him, trying to jam a backup regulator into his mouth, but the current was pulling at them, disorienting them. The last thing Mark heard was the sound of Jack's rebreather finally sputtering out, followed by a terrifying silence. Mark hesitated for just a split second, faced with the most agonizing choice of his life. And then he let go. He kicked backward, his hands finding the guideline in the dark, and began the long, lonely ascent back to the surface. When he finally broke through the ice an hour later, the others were waiting. They looked at him, then at the empty water behind him. Two men were missing. The cave entrance became a silent, somber scene marked only by the faint ripple of water beneath the ice. Within hours, the county sheriff arrived and sealed the site, officially declaring it too dangerous for any recovery attempt. The official word was that the bodies would stay where they were, entombed in the mountain. But for the surviving members of the team, that was simply unthinkable. They had trained together, dived together, trusted each other with their lives. Leaving them behind was not an option. 3 weeks later, under the cover of a moonless night, four divers returned to Iron Mountain. This time, it was in secret. No news crews, no police tape, no official sanction. There was only silence, frost, and a powerful, unspoken resolve. For the next 100 grueling hours, they worked their way back into that deadly maze. Inch by inch, breath by breath, the cold was relentless, biting through their advanced thermal suits. The silt was even worse this time, a constant, choking presence that clouded every move. But they pressed on because they knew exactly what they would find, and they knew they had to. Deep inside that tight restriction, they saw him, Jack. He was still suspended in the water, his arms frozen mid-motion, as if still reaching forward. His rebreather was flooded, and then, just a few yards deeper, they found the second diver, Eli Grant. He had tried to reach Jack to help him before his own air supply ran out. His tank was completely empty. His mask was fogged over. Both men had died within minutes of each other. Carefully, silently, the rescuers worked for hours in the crushing deep to bring their friends home. They cut through harness straps, painstakingly maneuvered the bodies through impossibly tight squeezes, scraping their own suits and skin raw against the stone. By the time they finally surfaced, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the frozen lake in brilliant shades of red and gold. It was one of the most difficult and dangerous recovery dives in American history, and it happened in complete secret. There were no medals. There was no news coverage. There were only friends who refused to leave one another behind in the dark. Later, investigators confirmed the cause. A catastrophic mechanical failure in Jack's rebreather had triggered severe oxygen toxicity. Combined with the freezing water and zero visibility, it made escape impossible. Months later, the cave was permanently sealed, its entrance now marked by a small, simple plaque. It reads, "They went where light does not reach and did not return." To this day, some locals in the area say that when the lake freezes solid in the winter, if you listen closely, you can still hear faint metallic clicks coming from deep below the ice. Like dive tanks gently knocking together in the dark as two friends continue their journey home together. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of courage and human spirit. We'll see you in the next one. Listen closely. It was October 15th, 2019, deep in the heart of Tennessee's Cumberland Plateau, a land of winding rivers, green hills, and ancient limestone caves carved by time and rain. That morning, 9 people gathered outside Hollow Creek Cavern, a stunning but unpredictable cave system, famous for its narrow tunnels filled with shallow, glistening water. 6 of them were tourists from across the country, families, friends, a 10-year-old boy named Eli, and a teenage girl named Grace. 2 experienced local guides led the group, both familiar with every twist of the underground river. The skies were calm. The air was heavy with late autumn warmth. Everything looked perfectly safe. The group entered just after noon, laughing as they waded into ankle-deep streams that ran like silver ribbons beneath their headlamps. The sound of water echoed off the walls, soft and hypnotic. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, and it was the way light shimmered against the rock, the cool mist kissing their faces, the low hum of flowing water beneath their boots. No one knew that 50 miles upstream, in the forested highlands where the cave's watershed began, a thunderstorm had just unloaded 2 inches of rain. The guides noticed the water deepening just an inch at first, then another. "It's normal," one of them said, trying to stay calm. But soon the current grew faster, and their laughter turned into nervous silence. A faint rumble echoed from the tunnel behind them. "Do you hear that?" Grace asked. The rumble became a roar. Then it hit. A wall of brown water thundered through the passage, sweeping through like a freight train. Lights flickered, screams echoed, and the peaceful trickle became pure chaos. The guides yelled for everyone to climb, to get higher. Some scrambled up a rocky incline, their hands slipping on the slick limestone. Others were caught instantly, pulled into the black current. The water rose within seconds, filling the narrow chamber from floor to ceiling. It stole their voices, their breath, and their light. Only Grace made it to safety. She clung to a narrow ledge 10 feet above the churning flood, her flashlight long gone, the cave now a pitch-black tomb. For 16 hours she waited in darkness, shivering, soaked to the bone, her fingernails torn from gripping the rock. She listened to the cave breathe drips, gurgles, echoes, and the distant sound of rescuers calling names that would never answer. By dawn, rescue teams had arrived, park rangers, divers, volunteers, anyone who could help. They pumped water out of the tunnels and pumped oxygen in, hoping against all hope. but one by one, the bodies were recovered. 8 in total, including Eli, the 10-year-old boy whose father had told him it would be an adventure. Grace was found alive, trembling and silent, her eyes empty. She never went underground again. The tragedy shook the entire region. Hollow Creek Cavern was immediately sealed, and state officials declared it off-limits during the rainy season from June through November. Warning signs were posted, clear and direct. Danger, flash flood risk. Do not enter during rain. For a few years, the rules were followed. The memory of the tragedy was still fresh, a raw wound on the community. But as time passed, memories faded. The fear that had kept the cave empty began to wane. Some local tour companies, driven by profit, quietly reopened the cave during the prohibited months, convincing themselves that a clear sky overhead meant safety below. They gambled with lives, betting against the unpredictable power of nature. Then, 5 years later, August 12th, 2024, it happened again. A group of 20 tourists, led by 2 guides, entered the same cave. The morning was bright and calm, though it had rained lightly the night before. They thought nothing of it. It was a beautiful summer day, perfect for an underground adventure. Around 5 p.m., as they began heading out, a distant thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from deep beneath the earth. Before they could react, another surge of water tore through the tunnel. It was a horrifying repeat of the past. Screams, crashing lights, and the same impossible roar filled the chamber once more. This time, however, rescue teams were better prepared and reached them faster. They managed to save nearly everyone except for one guide, a 37-year-old man named Michael Reyes. He'd stayed behind to help others climb out, pushing people towards safety even as the current ripped at his legs. He was a hero in the face of absolute terror. The last anyone saw of him, he was waist-deep in muddy water, shouting, "Go! Don't stop!" before the flood swallowed him whole. His body was found the next morning, carried half a mile downstream. Investigators later confirmed that the cave had been officially closed that day. The tour operator had ignored every warning, every sign, every lesson learned from the tragedy 5 years prior. They were charged with negligence and fined heavily, but for Michael's family and for the 8 who died years earlier, no punishment could ever balance what was lost. The price of their greed was a human life. Today, Hollow Creek Cavern remains sealed behind an iron gate, welded shut into the rock. Rain still falls in those Tennessee hills. The streams still flow silently beneath the earth. And sometimes when the air is heavy and the water runs fast, locals say you can hear faint voices echoing from the depths. Not cries of fear, but the ghostly laughter of people who once believed the cave was just another adventure. They were wrong. It was a reminder, a cruel one, that nature keeps its secrets, and when it chooses to reveal them, it does so without mercy. This story serves as a tragic lesson about respecting the power of the natural world and the devastating consequences of ignoring clear warnings. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Stay safe out there. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be in a place so deep underground that the sun is just a distant memory? A place where the silence is so absolute, it has a sound of its own. This is the story of Daniel Morrow and a place called Black Hollow, a place that would become both his final adventure and his forever home. It was late August 2019, high in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, where the clouds cling to the peaks like a shroud. A small team of international explorers had a singular goal: to map the Black Hollow cave system. This was a new frontier, a network of caverns rumored to plunge deeper than any other in North America. Among them was Daniel Morrow, a 34-year-old civil engineer from Oregon. Friends knew him as quiet but incredibly brave, a man who possessed a profound calm, especially under pressure. He wasn't chasing fame or glory. What Daniel loved was the unique stillness of the underground world, a profound peace he found nowhere else on Earth. The expedition was led by Dr. Victor Hansen, a seasoned Belgian geologist who had poured years of his life into organizing this mission. For nearly a week, the team lived in the darkness, moving like ghosts through the mountain's veins. They strung ropes across bottomless chasms, set up winches to descend into blackness, and meticulously charted shafts that dropped hundreds of feet. Their headlamps cut through the dark, illuminating walls that glistened with ancient moisture, while the distant murmur of underground rivers served as their constant soundtrack. They were ants in a cathedral built by time itself. By the 6th day, the toll of their work was undeniable. Fatigue was setting in. They hadn't seen a glimmer of sunlight for 144 hours. On August 28th, the decision was made. It was time to begin the long, arduous journey back to the surface. Their final major obstacle was a vertical shaft, a narrow throat of rock nearly 130 feet high. It was slick with moisture, and jagged ledges protruded from the walls like broken teeth. Daniel was the second to make the ascent. Above, his team operated the manual winch system, the steel cable humming with tension as it slowly coiled, pulling him upward. They watched the small, bright dot of his helmet light rise steadily through the darkness. He was almost there, just 20 more feet to the top, to safety, and then the unthinkable happened. A sharp, metallic snap tore through the silence of the shaft. The sound was brutal and final. The cable had split. For a fraction of a second, Daniel was suspended in the air, and then he was falling backward into the void. His body struck the rock wall once, then a second time, before he was completely swallowed by the darkness below. The fall was over 100 feet. When the last echoes of his impact faded, an absolute, suffocating silence descended. No one moved. The air became thick with the smell of rock, dust, and raw fear. It felt like an eternity, but minutes later, 2 of his teammates began their descent. They found him at the bottom of the shaft. He was broken, but somehow he was still alive. His breathing was shallow, and blood was already mixing with the mud on the cave floor. His spine was fractured. He couldn't move. He managed to whisper something, a sound so faint no one could make it out, before he slipped into unconsciousness. Daniel Morrow was now trapped nearly 1,300 feet beneath the surface of the mountain, in one of the deepest and coldest parts of the entire system. The call for help went out, triggering what would become one of the most complex and perilous cave rescues in American history. Dozens of volunteers, expert climbers, doctors, and rescue specialists began the dangerous journey into the mountain. They navigated the same narrow tunnels the expedition had charted, a slow, painstaking descent into the earth. Among them was a trauma surgeon from Denver. It took her more than 6 grueling hours of rappelling to finally reach Daniel's side. Down in that dark, cold chamber, the scene was surreal. Lit only by the stark beams of headlamps and a few candles, the surgeon worked silently beside him. The air was near freezing. Every exhale turned into a white cloud. There, on the muddy stone floor of a subterranean world, they attempted the impossible, a blood transfusion, done by hand with portable equipment that had been painstakingly lowered from the surface. And, against all odds, it worked. Daniel's pulse, which had been fading, grew stronger. For a fleeting moment, a wave of hope washed through the cave. For the next 2 days, the rescue effort was a testament to human determination. The team worked to lift him, inch by painstaking inch, back up the treacherous 130-foot shaft. They used the same manual winch system, but this time it was heavily reinforced with backup lines. With every turn of the winch, the very walls of the mountain seemed to groan. Rocks shifted ominously from above. A single misstep, one wrong move, could have brought tons of debris crashing down on all of them. And then, just as the sun was setting on the world above, the mountain began to crumble. A deep, thundering crack echoed through the shaft. It started with pebbles, then stones, then boulders. The rescuers instinctively shielded Daniel with their own bodies, but the rock fall was relentless. When the dust finally settled, the hopeful energy that had filled the cave was gone. His breath had stopped. The doctor searched for a pulse, but there was nothing. The official report would later cite hypothermia and the severity of his internal injuries. The fall hadn't just broken his body. It had initiated a slow, irreversible shutdown. They couldn't bring him out. The shaft was now far too unstable to climb again. Any attempt would risk the lives of the entire rescue team. After hours of agonizing debate, the rescuers had to make the hardest decision of their careers. They left Daniel Morrow where he lay, in the deep, silent earth that he had loved so much. Weeks later, the state officially sealed the cave, welding a heavy metal gate over the entrance. Today, if you hike the trail leading to Black Hollow, you'll find a small bronze plaque. On it are his name and a simple, poignant epitaph: "He went where few dared and found peace in the dark." The locals have a story. They say that in the spring, when the snow melts and the mountain creeks start to run, if you stand near the sealed entrance and listen closely, you can sometimes hear a faint echo rising from the depths, a whisper that sounds almost like a man breathing steady and calm deep beneath the world. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you found it as moving as I did, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more. We'll see you next time.